Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is the 107th meeting that we've had consecutively. Thank you all for joining us, veterans and new people in this process. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator today, as well as Dennis Small and Dennis Speed, co-moderators. And I'd like people just to take a moment to share this invitation with your various organizations, your friends, reasonable enemies, and get maximum output on this meeting. Just take a minute, takes all of 10 seconds to send an email, but we really need to have mass mobilization and activation of all of our groups. And I like to remind people that we created this group 107 weeks ago. In order to bring together the peace movement from around the world, above people's ideologies. If you're from the left, the right, whatever in between, it doesn't matter. As long as you are for true peace, you are welcome here. And we want to coordinate our activities so we have the maximum effect possible. And I'm sure, as you can realize, many of our enemies would like to prevent us from collaborating and creating true peace in the world. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. To start us off today, I'd like to have Helga LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Please go ahead, Helga.
Well, let me first greet all of you. I think we all are joining in the absolute, horror that we are still sitting on the verge of what could become World War III. And I'm not exaggerating that danger one bit. And, it's very difficult to rest when you have the President of the United States, President Trump, saying, I may do it, I may join Israel on bombing of Iran, I may not do it. Nobody knows what I will do. Obviously, not even he himself. And if you think about what the consequence of this would be, and on what fragile a thread world peace or whatever is left of it hangs, I think, I'm only reporting that many people we have been talking with in the last days are absolutely insecure, horrified. We got several mails to our office of people who said that they basically are leaving of an unlimited vacation, that they're going to an area which is geopolitically not in danger of being drawn into this conflict. Which, however, as the relevant examples of World War II demonstrate, there is no place safe once you get into this war dynamic. Now, the immediate danger naturally would be if the United States would be drawn into joining the bombing against Iran. The United States has these bomber buster bombs, very heavy bombs, which, however, despite their magnitude, are not yet sufficient to eliminate the nuclear facilities of Iran, which are 80 meters deep in the mountains at different locations. And they're also, not easy to hit because the exact location is not known, because they can be, at a different angle. They can be, not exactly down straight, but then at an angle to the side. So it is a very dangerous situation, because if you would get in this dynamic, the final phase of that would naturally be that Israel could use a nuclear bomb or several nuclear bombs to eliminate these Iranian nuclear facilities. Now, it is also escalating because Defense Minister Katz made this open threat for the assassination of the supreme religious leader Khamenei, by basically saying that he has lost the right to exist, which is a language which is already hair-raising. And as of now, if you look at it at the larger picture, what is happening in the Middle East is following old scripts. So, no matter what President Trump thinks he does, it is not his own decision, because right now all the events are following the scripts on the one side of the policy which was originally written out by Richard Pearl and Douglas Face, called the Clean Break, which was in '96 the answer of the neocons to counter the Oslo Accord of President Clinton. And also the report that we mentioned already last week of the Brookings Institute of 2009, 170-page report, which detailed all the different phases leading up to the present crisis, including the conclusion of the nuclear arms deal with Iran, the so-called JCPOA, which was agreed to by Obama and then unilaterally canceled by President Trump. And that is also in the Brookings Institute report, that then would lead to the pretext of making an attack on Iran, which is what we are seeing right now. So it is also very clear that the British have a very particular interest to keep this conflict going. I mean, not only did we see the role of the British in the Ukrainian war, but also here now Prime Minister Starmer has put the British forces on alert. The various British former heads of the MI6 are clearly in favor of an escalation. And that should remind us that the immediate target of this whole operation is not just whatever happens in the Middle East, where, in the clean break scenario, they had detailed 7 nations which were supposed to, basically regime change was supposed to occur. This was Iraq, Syria, Iran, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Libya, and the Palestinian occupied territory. And, you can see where most of these, with the exception maybe of Saudi Arabia, where these countries are. Iran would be the last one in that list. Libya, a complete failed state. Syria, suffering to the present day. And naturally, Lebanon in a terrible condition. So this was a policy of complete destruction. But that was not, the regime change in the region was not the only aim. Obviously, we should remember that the British House of Lords had basically said that they will do everything to prevent a second Trump administration from ever occurring. And since they could not prevent that, they are obviously trying to subvert that as quickly as they can. And unfortunately, this whole operation has already gone a whole way in that aim, which you can see in the fact that the half of the base of President Trump right now is almost turning away from him, the MAGA base, basically by thinking, that this is a betrayal, because Trump had promised he would end all wars and not start any new ones. And now he's about to bring the United States into a war which could go nuclear. So, well, also Trump seems to not listen to the people in his cabinet anymore, whom he had appointed to counter the neocons, because his first administration had failed to a very large extent, because he could not defeat the British efforts, to destabilize him with the Russiagate operation, which turned out to be a complete fake, mainly due to the fact that, the entire Trump apparatus was infested with neocons on every possible level. And when Trump tried to oppose it this time by appointing such people as Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, and C.D. Vance, who seems to be on his side, but there is still the neocon faction, which is moving in the other direction. So when Tulsi Gabbard in February reported again for the report of the intelligence services that there is no indication that Iran is preparing to build a nuclear bomb, and she reiterated that very recently. Trump was very dismissive of it and said that he doesn't think she knows what she's talking about. So this is very, very, very worrisome. And that also, puts a different angle on the video which Tulsi Gabbard had made coming back from her trip to Hiroshima, where she had pointed out in the starkest possible terms with excellent footage showing what a nuclear war would do, namely that it would burn every city, every citizen. It would annihilate every city in the United States and around the world. And, I think we should absolutely keep using her video as well as previous videos we had shown on the IPC meetings about what the impact is of nuclear war, because unless people understand that we are talking about the end of civilization, if this conflict escalates, people are not really getting what this is all about. Now, I think it's not said too much that we are in absolutely fateful weeks, because next week there will be the NATO summit. Now, originally, NATO was intending to go ahead on its global NATO, to basically keep building the bloc of NATO, pulling in all kinds of countries, naturally against the idea of a multipolar world. Now, that is not going so well, simply because Trump is a factor of insecurity. And, he had threatened in the past that the United States may pull out of NATO. That doesn't look very likely right now. But, it is definitely a factor of uncalculability, which we just saw at the G7 summit in Canada, where Trump left early, showing his disdain for that group of particular people. Now, that could happen again at the NATO summit, but NATO for sure will, solidify and reaffirm its policies, that there are these permanent enemies, a direct threat, which is mentioned in the text, being prepared for the summit, that Russia is such a threat. Then the antagonistic attitude towards China for sure will be maintained. And it is that kind of geopolitical thinking, which is the real threat. Because if it's not the Ukraine war, which goes out of control, and even not the Iran situation, it could very well be the coming war with China, which we know some of these people are absolutely committed to have. Now, the situation in the Middle East as such is horrible. After 1 week of bombings, of missiles, drones, bombs thrown by both sides, Israel and Iran, much devastation has been done in Iran. Some of the nuclear reactors have been hit. The Israeli side looks absolutely terrible. According to Scott Ritter, the damage in terms of infrastructure destruction, which was accomplished already, is more than half a trillion of dollars. That's $500 billion. And that for a relatively small country of only 9.7 million inhabitants. This is a very, very big blow to its economy. And, it shows very clearly that Israel is risking its own existence by what it's doing. It's actually a suicide mission, some people say. Now, other people like German Chancellor Merz, who endorsed, immediately backed up the unprovoked war of aggression which Israel committed against Iran, they are very quick to say that if it comes to Russia and Ukraine, where there clearly is a prehistory, and in this case, there was absolutely no provocation by Iran to have caused that. Nevertheless, Chancellor Merz endorsed it and then even used the unbelievable formulations that Israel is doing the dirty work for us. Now, when I heard this formulation, I said, how can a civilized person, a German chancellor, use such a deprived language where thousands and thousands of people are dying, the entire life is being destroyed of many, many people. I mean, what kind of a mindset can produce such sentences? The minimum you can say, it is reflecting a very dubious colonial mindset, that these are just, some lower people who you don't have on the same level like us, the people in Europe who are living in the beautiful garden, as Joseph Borrell had said it a little while ago. But, I mean, the Russians find a very harsh language to characterize Merz and basically say directly that this is the spirit of Germany of 80 years ago. That's heavy, heavy language, but, I think it is where things are going. So the NATO summit next week, then on the 6th and 7th of July is the BRICS meeting in Rio de Janeiro. And there was just a phone conversation between President Trump and President Putin discussing the situation in the Middle East, concluding that they have identical views. They both condemned the aggression by Israel, and they are both reiterating that a diplomatic solution is still absolutely possible. Putin, in particular, said that he is certain that a diplomatic solution can be found whereby both the legitimate right of Iran to develop its peaceful nuclear energy can be guaranteed, as well as the security of the Israeli state. And, it is very clear that what is guiding China and Russia is what Deputy Foreign Minister Pankin just expressed very, very dramatically. He said, the most important thing in this conflict is to avoid an escalation to World War III, because that would be the end of mankind. So I think that the sane people, the sane forces in the world are moving along that idea that the most important thing is to avoid World War III, because after that there would be nobody left to even reflect why it happened. And all the beautiful things mankind has created since its beginning would be null and void. There would be nobody to listen to Beethoven. There would be nobody to listen to Shakespeare, because we all would be dead. And I think we have to really, plastically, realistically have that sense that that is what we are talking about. So, hopefully the BRICS summit will can come up with an offer, which I'm sure they will be working on. And if I would have a suggestion, I would definitely say the BRICS summit must make an offer to propose a new security and development architecture in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia, offering a plan which takes into account the interest of every single country on the planet. And I think if such a suggestion would come from the BRICS, I think it would have the best possible chances to be picked up, because there are many people who are realizing that we have reached a point of no return if we don't stop. So I think that that is what I can say for now.
Thank you, Helga, for that very sobering opening and situating the world for everyone here. Next, I'd like to include John Steinbach with the Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee of the National Capital Area in DC. And thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Steinbach, and everything that you've been doing in stopping nuclear war. I greatly appreciate it. Please go ahead. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Anastasia. And I'd like to thank the Schiller Institute for doing this peace forum so that, really wildly politically diverse voices can come together and work together to establish peace. So if I can start with a joke, and if Ray is on, he'll probably appreciate this. I'm so old that I remember there was a time when I agreed more with Bernie Sanders than I did with Tucker Carlson. So, so having said that, so I'm going to be having to leave early. So I'm going to be giving a mini lecture on the Israeli nuclear program, and the genesis of this was back about 25 years ago. I did a piece for Covert Action Quarterly on the Israeli nuclear arsenal. And then I did a program at the Palestine Center that was broadcast on C-SPAN. So my name got out there, and apparently somebody in the Strategic Studies Institute of the UAE, they do a strategic energy program every year. They found out about it, and they reached out and said, yes, and did this paper in 2008. I think that you're going to post a link to the paper in the chat. It's about 11 to 12,000 words, 188 footnotes. Just for those who want to learn more, I'd recommend Seymour Hersh's work, The Samson Option, and I'll talk about that briefly as well. And then Avner Cohen wrote 3 or 4 books about the Israeli nuclear program, and he wrote that as an insider, as an Israeli who was part of that program. So Avner with a V, and Avner Cohen and Seymour Hersh, for if you want to learn more. So to understand the Israeli program, we have to go all the way back literally to the birth of Israel. And Ben-Gurion had a vision of building a nuclear arsenal in his mind so that the Holocaust would never be repeated. Shimon Peres was a young deputy minister, and he became the person in charge of the Israeli nuclear program. And the Oppenheimer of the program, if you will, was a scientist by the name of Ernst Bergman. And so Israel in 1948 started their program, and it got a huge boost in the mid-1950s when the U.S. gave Israel a 5-megawatt highly enriched uranium research reactor. By the way, ironically, at the exact same time they gave that reactor to Israel, they gave an exactly the same reactor to Iran under the Shah. So that's one of history's great ironies. So Israel started developing a nuclear weapons program, and very early on, as early as 1955, 1956, they started collaborating with the French. And Israel was a full partner in the French program. So they were there from the beginning. And I want to stress partner, because the Israeli scientists and technicians had all been educated in the United States. They were very highly technically proficient. And so they were full partners in the French program, including the French nuclear testing program in Algeria. So when we look at the Algerian tests in the 50s and early 60s, we should understand that those really were joint Israeli-French tests. So, and then France also in the mid-1950s started building the Dimona reactor. And so, France was in on the propaganda. So Israel and France both contended this was a research reactor for research purposes only, and was for civilian purposes. But the reality was, and the French knew this absolutely, that this was a plutonium breeder reactor assembly, and that there was no connection to the electrical grid, and it included a plutonium processing facility in the basement. So they knew absolutely that this was a nuclear weapons program. Eisenhower found out about this, was very suspicious, and he got together with Kennedy, and Kennedy also was tremendously suspicious. Both of them were very much against Israel ever getting the bomb. We have to remember that this was at the same time and shortly after the Suez Crisis, when Eisenhower basically put his foot down with Israel, France, and Britain and said, no, you will not politicize the Suez Canal. And so I think that there's a good possibility that the French and Israeli collaboration was in part a consequence of the Suez Crisis. And Israel started to develop build up a plutonium stockpile more and more. They continued to insist that it was a research facility. Kennedy finally demanded that inspectors be permitted, and he sent several teams of investigators there. So Israel went to great extremes. So, for example, they had ordered their control panel undercover for the nuclear facility, and so they went back and they ordered a duplicate control center so that when the inspectors came, everything they saw was a total fraud. They were never shown any of the actual Dimona complex. They were shown this mock-up. And so they came back and they said, well, we think it's for civilian purposes. Kennedy was still very, very suspicious. He was pursuing further investigation because he was determined to shut down the Israeli nuclear program. And then very shortly after he was killed, I'm sure Ray probably knows a lot more about this than I do. So, but anyway, so continuing by the 67 war, according to Avner Cohen, Israel had two primitive nuclear bombs or atomic bombs, fission bombs, almost certainly. By the 72 war, they had 6 or 7 ready to go. And this was the first time when Israel actually, in an overt way, exercised their doctrine. Shimon Peres called it non-conventional compellence. Those are Peres's words. And it was directed at the Arab states and Europe, but it was also Francis Perrin, who was the director of the French program, in the 50s said, we thought that the Israeli program was actually aimed at the United States in order to coerce the United States to do what we want. That's a pretty much direct quote from Francis Perrin. So in the 72-73 war, the Israelis threatened to use nuclear weapons unless the U.S. airlifted massive airlifts. So Kissinger and Nixon reluctantly caved in. The airlift took place, and the world went on a nuclear alert. So the Soviets went on like a stage 3 or stage 4 nuclear alert because remember, at that time, the Soviet Union was a big ally of Egypt and of Syria. So this was a big issue for them. So so continuing with the story. So Israel continued to maintain a policy of nuclear opaqueness, saying their official policies was, we're not going to be the first to introduce nuclear weapons into the Middle East. But of course, they'd already done so on a massive level. Pretty much everybody knew they had done this, but the consensus was that they maybe had a couple dozen bombs and that they were primitive bombs. And but then Mordecai Vanunu came out with revelations. So he was a young technician that worked in Dimona, and he was a leftist activist, and he took hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures and smuggled out secret documents and took them to the Sunday London Times. And the Sunday London Times recruited Frank Barnaby and Ted Taylor. Now, Barnaby and Taylor were two of the main scientists in the Manhattan Project, and they were both bomb designers. And so they were shown all these documents and the photographs, and they came up back then, which was when it was in the 80s, I believe, They came up with an estimate that Israel had an arsenal back then of 200, as many as 200 nuclear weapons. But more importantly, they analyzed the data, they looked at the photographs, and they determined that Israel not only possessed the atomic bomb, but that they were also possessed the nuclear bomb, the hydrogen bomb, and they possessed the technology for miniaturized nuclear weapons that could be easily paired with warheads. So this changed the whole game. And there's a lot of quotes in Cohen's books and in Hirsch's book about what the reaction of the U.S. government was. They were amazed. They were astounded. It was a really colossal failure of the intelligence community. And again, Ray knows much more about this than I do. So and they also determined that in all likelihood that Israel not only possessed the atomic bomb and boosted fission bombs, but it then in all probability possessed the hydrogen bomb, and in all probability possessed some version of a neutron bomb. And so then we had the situation where during Carter's period, there was a double flash determined by a Vela satellite over the Indian Ocean off the coast of South Africa. There was a cover-up conducted, but Cohen has basically spilled the beans and said that this was the last of 3 nuclear tests that were carried out by South Africa and Israel. And so I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly. It was South Africa that provided most of the uranium for the program. So a lot of the money for the program, and it was Germany that supplied yellow cake uranium when Israel didn't have any. There's a lot of smoking gun evidence that hundreds of pounds of enriched uranium were smuggled out of a plant in Pennsylvania called NUMEC. So, and of course, the U.S. all along has been pushing it. And then the final part of my lecture here is that today Israel possesses anywhere from 100 to 500 sophisticated nuclear, thermonuclear bombs, neutron bombs. It also possesses a very sophisticated delivery system capable of reaching the east coast of the U.S., capable of reaching beyond Moscow, all the capitals of Europe. It has 3 major ballistic missiles, Jericho 1, Jericho 2, Jericho 3. Jericho 3, we don't know exactly how developed that is because it's very top secret, but we do know that about 10, 15 years ago, Israel launched a satellite using a Jericho 3 rocket, and they launched it against the rotation of the Earth. So that means that was a true intercontinental ballistic missile. They also have 5 or 6, at least 5, and I think 6 now, operating high-tech Dolphin-class submarines given to them by Germany. And these are all nuclear capable, and they're capable of staying underwater for days and days and days and weeks at a time with a huge range. They also have a variety of fighter planes and bombers. So that's the bottom line scenario. And then just to wrap this up really quickly, one of the policies that Hirsch actually talks about quite a bit. I think that when he called his book The Samson Option, it was kind of an inside joke, because if you actually read the book, the main point is that it's the Samson option, which is the idea of, Samson pulling down the pillars of the temple, that Israel, if its existence is threatened, is going to destroy the world, rather than go under. But Hirsch pointed out that that's really not the case, that Israel's nuclear arsenal has been used and continues to be used for coercive purposes in order to, as Israel Shahak said, freeze the status quo for Israel's advantage. And it's particularly aimed, as I said earlier, at the United States. And then my final comment is this, and I hope, Ray, that you can comment on this, and I'm going to stay on as long as I can to hear what you say. But but it's become increasingly clear that the IAEA is just rotten to the core, and that they play a major role in what's happening right now. And the IAEA is really at the heart of the NPT. So this is, I think, fatally has weakened the IAEA in terms of its credibility. I think it's seriously weakened the NPT. And I think it's also seriously weakened the credibility of the United Nations. So that's my report, Anastasia. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, John, for that. I want to make sure I have the correct paper for you. It is titled The Israeli Nuclear Weapons Program on your website, HiroshimaPeaceCommittee.net,
Yes.
from
Yes.
2008. Great.
That has all the footnotes, so that's the best one.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'll just do a quick screen share just so people can see it. I've included the link in the chat so people can grab it real quick, HiroshimaPeaceCommittee.net. You can find this paper there. Very important for us to get this around. Thank you so much for sharing that. And there's also, I was sent another item from your organization where you're going to be holding an event July 16th on Trinity Day. And I just wanted to make sure that that link is also known. That's in the chat for people to register for that as well. So just sending that over for people. But thank you so much. And let me now bring in for the discussion Ray McGovern, who is a close collaborator and friend of the International Peace Coalition. He's a former senior analyst for the CIA and founding member of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Thank you so much for joining us, Ray. You have the floor.
And thank you. And thank you especially, John. What a terrific briefing that was, and compressed to a reasonable length. I'll try to be also reasonable here, and so I'll spare the joke. I liked your joke, but I think one joke is probably enough, maybe too much for the circumstances we're in today. Let me start out with some of the things you said about John Kennedy and how he was against it, and we didn't even have we'd had satellite. We did not have satellites. We were just beginning to get the U-2s that could take photography, but we had one person who is the equivalent of an Israeli spy in the CIA. He controlled everything having to do with Israel. His name was James Jesus Angleton. We know that he was complicit in the assassination of John Kennedy. There's material evidence to that effect. And I have, my first boss at the CIA was implicated in the cover-up. He and Angleton and the rest of that little cabal did it, okay? Now, what are the implications of that? Even when I was writing pieces on Soviet foreign policy, if it so much as mentioned Israel, it had to go through the counterintelligence staff, manned and directed by James Jesus Angleton. So, was Angleton a participant in this Potemkin village episode that you just explained? I think he probably was. So when they came back, those inspectors, it looks pretty clean to me. That's because Angleton and Israeli comrades constructed this Potemkin village. Now, John, I'm not going to speculate as to whether that was part of the motive on James Jesus Angleton's cooperation with Dick Helms. And let's face it, we know the names now, for God's sake, okay? Angleton was one of the prime movers. Whether it was the Israeli aspect here, I mean, the guy, James Jesus Angleton, was given a kind of a wonderful, not only obituary, but a big celebration when he died in Israel. They made no anyhow. So that's one important point that I'm glad that you asked me to talk about. Helga, I think, set things up quite well. So I'm not going to go through any of the latest back and forth. The big thing, of course, that I saw yesterday evening was that the president is saying, "Well, I'll give you 2 weeks, maybe I don't know. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to decide. A matter of fact, you don't know, and I don't know. You know, how do you deal with somebody like this?" Well, I think Putin and the Chinese are dealing with him the best way they know how, and that's off the record. They're exactly in touch with him. Okay, this is different, right? I mean, uh, Blinken wouldn't even give Lavrov his telephone number, for God's sake. Or if he did, it was the party line that his teenage daughter was on all the time. So this is the good news. I am still a glass half full person, recognizing full well that, half full is not enough on this issue, for God's sake. We have to be really careful. So I'm going to be shorter than usual here. And I want to thank John especially for his excellent presentation. And I want to leave time for him and me and anyone else to have a little dialogue before he has to leave at 12. And there's a chance I may have to leave shortly thereafter.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ray. Yeah, I wanted to see Helga, if you had a response to anything John and Ray have said, and then go to John and Ray. Oh, you're muted, Helga.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Yeah, John, Mr. Steinbach, I have actually a question which has been bothering me for quite some time. I mean, everybody knows that Israel has nuclear weapons. That is sort of the, factor in the situation, but nobody speaks about it. I mean, I'm pretty sure that one of the reasons why Iran would even want to develop nuclear weapons is because Israel has nuclear weapons. And, I believe also that there is not such a thing as a divided security. I mean, either you have security for all or you have security for none. So what is in your expertise the mechanism how this functions? Because, I'm obviously speaking from Germany, where everything which has to do with Israel, you cannot even mention the word Israel without that you are being called an anti-Semitic, even if you have not said anything other than the name. So maybe the German situation is not the most typical, but what is it that this obvious fact cannot be discussed?
Thank
Yeah, well, it sounds impossible that this could exist in this day and age. I would say first and foremost that it is being discussed more than ever before in alternative media here in this country and to a limited degree in other countries. But that is the fly in the ointment. How do let's call it the Zionist entity, is what the Arabs have been calling Israel. How is it that they have such power over U.S. policymakers in the U.S. Congress? Well, I don't know, but they do. And I just learned that the fellow who approves all the appointments, all the important appointments for the Trump regime, is a fellow who is an arch Zionist, and the people he has in his office, he may not even realize that he was persuaded to put these people in. They're arch Zionists. Now the press is dominated by Zionists. New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. Just look at their record, not only on Israel but on Ukraine. So I don't know how you meet this challenge. It's been around for a very long time. I'll just finish by saying this for those of you who don't remember, okay? Back in 2001, Benjamin Netanyahu was in the living room of some adoring constituents, okay? And he was holding forth, and there was a video camera there on. He said, "Turn it off." Guess what? The fellow forgot to turn it off. Guess what? It's on YouTube, okay? So what did Netanyahu say? Well, the hostess said, "Now, isn't the whole world going to hate us, Bibi? I mean, how do you understand this?" He said, "No, the whole world's not going to hate us, but the Americans, if we become the black sheep here." No, no, look, says Need, and this is a quote. "I know the Americans, okay? They support us, 80% of them. This is absurd," end quote. Okay, now, why do I mention that? Look it up, it's on the video. What does that mean then? It was 80% then. Was it now? I don't know. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but I think it's below 50%, given what they've just done. So that's a big factor. And it's also a factor among the people that I'm told are Trump's base, okay? So there is this 2-week period where we ought to get out and do whatever we can to tell Trump, look, don't be sucked into, don't be mousetrapped into destroying that part of the world and maybe us too, right? I'll stop there because I'd really want to hear what John has to say.
Hi
Yeah.
again, John. You broke up a little bit.
No, I got that. So yeah, and thank you for the question, Helga. So I mean, first of all, I take it at face value that Israel has no intention of developing a nuclear weapon. I mean, under the Shah, it's pretty clear that
Iran, you mean? Iran.
what did
Iran,
I say? What did I say?
Israel.
Oh, geez. Okay. So, right, Iran. So I think it's, I mean, if for people who want background, Karen Talbot wrote a really book on Shia, and and the whole, the emphasis I think is on the whole martyrdom thing, but the emphasis should not be on that. It should be on that's the sense of social justice. In many ways, Shiism is very, very closely related ethically and morally to true Christianity. The idea of social justice, Christ in the temple chasing out the money changers, and that kind of stuff. So I take it at face value that Iran had, and it really has no intention of building a nuclear weapon. But what your question goes to the heart of what my concern is, because the deal with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it was a kind of a deal with the devil. And our late friend Sam Day, who was the editor of the Progressive, called it not worth the paper it's written on, but really, in a sense, it's all we have. And the deal was that the non-nuclear states would have the ability to develop peaceful nuclear technology, and in return, the nuclear states made a firm commitment to pursue nuclear disarmament. And on one level, they did. So today we have in 12 or 13 or 14,000 nuclear weapons, whereas back then we had over 70,000. So in that sense, they did disarm. But what happened was with something that I call pruning the deadly nuclear tree. And I think the New START Treaty exemplified that. As the U.S. after they signed New START said, well, this is the treaty that we wanted, and their rationale was the U.S. had a tremendous technological advantage over the Russia that was just emerging from their Great Depression. Caused by us, by the way, primarily caused by us. And so the numbers decreased, but the sophistication increased and the usability increased. But getting back to your question, the reality is that Israel is, one of only 4 non-signatories to the NPT. It's in East Asia, the Middle East. It's the only one that has nuclear weapons, and it's not a feasible situation. And Hans Blitz has talked about this extensively. Back in the day, Mohammed El-Baradei, who was a director of the IAEA, who actually had teeth and who actually told the truth, and the U.S. deliberately went out and eliminated al-Baradei from the IAEA and turned it into the nest of spies that it is today. It's unfair, and it's destabilizing, and the issue has to be, the existence of Israel's nuclear arsenal. That's the destabilizing influence, has nothing to do with Iran. And even if Iran had nuclear weapons, which it doesn't, for overwhelming, literally rivals the Soviets and the United States. And so it wouldn't matter if Iran had 50 nuclear weapons, it still wouldn't change anything at all. So thank you for your good question. It's really complicated, and I probably didn't help, but that's my stab at it.
If I could respond, John, and thank you very much for those remarks. With respect to the IAEA, it is a nest of spies. That's demonstrable, okay? Now, back in the day, el-Baradei, the Egyptian who headed up the IAEA, when Dick Cheney and George Bush and the others invented this yellow cake uranium from deepest, darkest Africa. Remember that? From Niger. And they go, oh, my God, that was crazy. We all knew it was crazy. What did el-Baradei do? He appeared before the U.S. the UN Security Council, and he said, these reports, I had my people look, they Googled it, and in a day and a half, they found out that all those reports were not authentic. Despite that, 2 weeks later, the UK and the US invaded Iraq on the pretense that they had weapons of mass destruction. Now, it's even worse now because the IAEA is totally corrupted, and the intelligence community, which to its credit has since 2007 said Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon, well, Trump has said, I don't care what she says. She being the National Intelligence Director, Tulsi Gabbard. So we're up against it, and it's just up to us, and I'll stop here, but I've been saying this for a long time. We have to find some way within these next 2 weeks to show Trump that it ain't okay that we do the bidding of Zionists who are actually doing genocide in Gaza, amid other things.
Actually, I have a proposal for you, John, because your presentation was excellent, as well as your response. And one, I want to get permission from you that we can take that video, and then I can provide it to the viewers today, the people who are registered IPC members, and then people start making clips and getting this out all over social media, contacting various places, and getting this stuff out so we can make this a big hubbub around Israel having nuclear weapons. So we actually get governments talking about this.
Anything I can do to help, and it's been a pleasure chatting with Ray and chatting with everyone, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave now. So thanks again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, John Steinbach, for joining us.
Thanks, John. Anastasia, let me add one little wrinkle here, which is significant. I am an intelligence analyst professional, retired, but not really. I have been wondering whether my CIA should exist or be destroyed. I have been resisting the notion of appealing for its being dissolved because there was one issue on which my former colleagues in analysis were standing firm, and that was since 2007 saying Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon. We say that unanimously, and we say that with high confidence. And every year thereafter, repeated as recently as last March. What now? My God, how are those honest analysts going to feel when the president says, I don't care what she says, I don't care what they say? Well, maybe it's time to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe there's no hope for the CIA. I'll just leave it at that. I have a little call from, can you just tell? I'll come back. My wife needs my help.
Absolutely, no problem. No, thank you, Ray, for that, for your input, and thank you, John, for your input as well. And as I had said to people who are IPC registrants, I'll make sure that that video gets out to people and that people can make quotes, and we'll continue with our agenda. I just want to say one last thing before we go to the next person. Mariano Isano, who is a diplomat from Equatorial Guinea, who's also the lead at the United Nations Regional Center for Peace and Disarmament in Africa. Unfortunately, there's a mass power outage that has happened there, and he could not join us at the time. If he is able at some point later today, then that'd be fantastic. But just wanted to let people know that he was scheduled to be on and unfortunately could not be on, which would have.
Anastasia,
Oh,
I have one more minute, if I may.
okay.
And that is, I wanted to point out that in addition to this principal stand, telling the truth, wow, telling the truth by the CIA analysts and the rest of the community, let's give them credit. The former CIA director, William Burns, not known for having told the truth, on his way out last October, he said, wow, he says, I just want to reiterate that Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon. Okay, you remember that? Okay. And besides, our collection activities is so thorough that we would learn very, very quickly. The West would know almost immediately if they started working on a nuclear weapon. Wow. And then he said the same thing 2 weeks before he went out of office. So, look, for people who will say that, the Iranians are very secretive, they can do this. Well, there's the head of the CIA finally speaking truth to this. Not only that they're not working on a nuclear weapon, but if they started, we would know very quickly, was his word. I've got to go now. I'm sorry about that. I will try to get back. It has to do with my domestic responsibilities. Thanks.
Right. Well, I think folks definitely take what you have to say to heart, especially when you're talking about the problems with the CIA. So thank you very much, Ray, for that. So continuing with our agenda. Next, we have Professor Eduardo Sequeira. Apologize if I'm butchering. I did have a Sequeira from Brazil. He's a retired professor of public health at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And thank you so much for joining us. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the Chile Institute to invite me to participate in this very important effort to build peace around the globe. I will change a little bit the topic from the perspective of what's so-called global south or the global majority. The global majority is not really interested in discussing nuclear weapons and nuclear war because the focus is much more on development, on inequality, in social justice, in the ability of these countries to develop their own potential. President Lula is trying to shift the agenda towards this direction. But as you well know, within the BRICS, the countries that are mostly with power to deal with this issue are China and Russia, and possibly India. And what the BRICS countries are trying to do is to get unity, exactly to propose what Ms. LaRouche proposed, which is a peaceful agenda for global development, especially against poverty, which has been what Lula is trying to do, but this is not the agenda that ends up prevailing in the meetings in the G7 at all. As far as the BRICS are concerned, I believe the agenda he's going to try to do, since it's going to be held in Brazil, Brazil has some say on what the agenda will be, will try to develop the agenda of peaceful negotiations and global trade under new rules. It has become clear for most populations in the global south that the conflicts that we are seeing in the Middle East are not only about the Middle East, they're about trying to paralyze the development of the BRICS, of the One Belt, One Road, and many other developments that have been happening for at least 10 years in many countries, especially in South America, but not only, all over the world. And the shift in this agenda has been paralyzed by the day-to-day conflicts that have been built and promoted by the country that's trying to impede these other countries to move in that direction. That's mostly the United States current administration. Although it is not the only administration that's trying to do that. Since Obama, there has been this so-called pivot to Asia to basically prevent China to be able to develop the other alternative. There is an alternative, which is not about nuclear weapons, which is not about nuclear war. It's about development, peaceful development, global development for all countries, for sovereignty. And that is the other agenda that probably the BRICS will try to focus on. Not necessarily to create a new currency, which is the most concern of Donald Trump, to prevent the dollar from not being the dominant currency in the world, but developing alternatives for these countries to trade. And that should be the agenda. That should be the peaceful agenda for the 21st century. What I believe we are seeing is the United States losing power, losing hegemony, and using Israel and other countries, not only Israel, Ukraine and others, trying to paralyze this alternative, which sooner or later will develop, will be the dominant agenda. But unfortunately, in the next several weeks, months, maybe the whole year, we're going to be dealing with this situation of potential nuclear weapon conflict. It is clear to me that Israel is not doing this only on behalf of Israel. Israel is definitely a tool for United States policies, as Ukraine is. Although the origins of the conflicts were already explained very well before, from the perspective of the global South, this is not really what matters. And what we need, unfortunately, at this point is a massive movement for peace. And this agenda for peace, for whatever reason, we can discuss in more detail, has become secondary, tertiary in many countries in the world, unfortunately. And it's high time for us to put this at the center of the agenda, because without peace, we're not going to be able to develop anything alternative to neoliberalism, to neo-fascism, etc. I believe what we're seeing in the world today is a decadence of neoliberalism and the emergence of a new alternative. And the folks who support this, they are desperate to prevent this new agenda to gain foothold and become the main agenda for the whole world. From the perspective of the global South, they are not in the game. For them is not nuclear weapons. Most of them do not have nuclear weapons. They don't want to have nuclear weapons, but it seems that the rule of the game is such that if you don't have a nuclear weapon, you are always threatened in many ways. And this is the case of Brazil, who actually tried to develop nuclear weapons in the past and was clearly suffered a lot of pressure from the United States to prevent that. People there have the ability to develop. You may or not know, Brazil has a peaceful development of nuclear energy. We have the technology. And for many people, by looking at the situation these days, it seems that the alternative for most countries in the developed countries in the global South is to develop their nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, this is not the way to go. It should be the opposite. But given the threats that are developing more and more, it seems that the alternative would be the only deterrence that you have is to do what North Korea did. Develop your own, and then you may have peace in your country to develop your own country. This is not the way it should be, but unfortunately, the real politics is such that it's putting pressure in many countries to develop this. As was mentioned before, the NPT may not be what will hold these countries to go forward. And I'm very concerned about that, not only for the short-term development of this situation, but the threat that the only way you can be sovereign in the 21st century is to have your own deterrence. So we need to advocate for nuclear disarmament instead of the opposite. And because of the situation, the threats that the United States and its vassals in Europe are creating, it seems that the countries come to the conclusion that my only solution would be to do the opposite, which is not what the agenda should be. The agenda should be peaceful development for everybody. And I hope and I think this is what's going to happen during the BRICS. There will be probably a common declaration for peace, for diplomacy, but the most important agenda is the other one, is how we're going to invest in development, protect the environment. Brazil is going to host as well the the COP30 in November. So the agenda for the Brazilian government is very much peaceful development, alternatives for protect the environment, protecting population, eliminate poverty. And China is the model for most of the countries in the South. And I believe by having these conflicts, what you actually have to do is to address the immediate threat, but knowing that this is not leading us anywhere that makes sense. This is a crazy alternative for humanity to be discussing if we're going to exterminate each other next week, within a month, or within a year. Obviously, this is a crazy idea for some folks who do not represent their peoples. So I actually refuse to call the people of the United States represented by Trump, or the people of the United Kingdom represented by Starr, or the people of Germany represented by Merz. These folks do not represent the real interests, the national interests of their populations. And I'm hopeful that sooner they will be removed from power, because they're creating such threat that as soon as people realize what's at stake, they will remove them, which is already starting to happen. And I believe, hope, my half full glass is that I really believe the peoples of the world will be able to meet this challenge. On the one hand, there is a threat. On the other hand, there is a hope. The crisis, as the Chinese always say, the best alternative always comes when you have crises such as this. And I believe we're heading that way. It's going to be either peace or extermination of humanity. And I'm sure, 100% sure, that most people of the world will choose peace. If it's not going to be in a peaceful way, it's going to be in a violent way. Unfortunately, this is what we already see in the United States in the demonstrations. The fact that Trump is actually using the military to repress immigrants, using Marines in peaceful demonstrations. So I believe this is probably going to happen despite our best intentions. We are creating a situation, not only international, but at the national level, very extreme conflicts. And I'm seeing signs in the United States that people are heading in the right direction. Trump is losing support even within its base, and the population of the United States is moving in the right direction in terms of not being supportive of wars. And if he does what he's saying he's gonna do, I'm sure there's gonna be a major rebellion in the United States. The people of the United States are not ready to support another war. And I'm quite sure that this is going to become very clear very soon. But unfortunately, the agenda of peace has not been the main agenda in the demonstrations yet. The fact that they said we don't want any kings is already showing that the United States, the population of the United States, understands that this is a president that wants to become a dictator, a king. That's a good sign. It's a sign that the level of understanding, of awareness, is growing. I believe also, if a poll is done today, you're going to see that many, many more people do not support genocide, do not support Israel. It's growing, especially amongst the youth. So I'm very hopeful that on the people, not on the leadership that we have in most of the countries in the West these days. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for that. Definitely agree that massive development should be the center of the discussion. I just want to make one note about what's happening, what you were talking about with the US and the UK. I think this has to be peaceful, and we've got to have all of these various organizations who are on right now mobilizing like crazy. We can't let, various groups that want to subvert different things. Walmart was involved with all these different rallies. I mean, Diane Sayre went through a number of things, but I think we have to organize our population around nonviolent direct action, which are a number of things that we've been doing. Anyway, I think this is going to be, we'll have some reports on a number of things that we've been doing. Diane Sayre in particular, she was just at the United Nations with a number of organizers in the street with our emergency statement that we've been getting out all over the country and all over the world. And I think this is a really good example of what people should be doing as well. So please, why don't you go ahead, Diane?
Okay, thanks a lot. And I would say also in response to the previous speaker, in part, what we're actually in right now, in my opinion, is regime change against the United States, because both parties, I mean, what was Kamala Harris and Biden, and then people voted for Trump thinking that he was going to be a peace candidate, and instead they're getting this. And it's true, there is a total uproar in his base. On his birthday army march in DC, only a few thousand people showed up, which indicates, I think, the massive loss of support. And we saw it also on Truth Social when he came out and denounced Tucker Carlson for not supporting American military involvement in Iran. And then everybody of Trump's base said, no, Tucker Carlson is right. We agree with him. We don't agree with you. The No Kings rally are at the top, of course, a trap, because it's the billionaires. They are not against the genocide in Gaza. Some people come to them who are, of course. But the design, in effect, is for there not to be government, for there not to be leadership, and for the US to not be in a position to actually tip the balance in favor of the new paradigm that Helga has been talking about. So there's enormous confusion. But what I should just say, and by way of report, is that we had been planning, hoping that the conference that France and Egypt were calling for in reconstruction of Gaza would be happening at the UN, but thanks to the Israeli unprovoked attack on Iran, that has been postponed again. But we had when I was there, about 15 people right in Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza, and it was quite amazing. We met wonderful people and many Americans, because there was a anti-genocide rally down the street. The Veterans for Peace have been holding a hunger strike, and people were passing by. Diplomats are a bit nervous about taking literature because, believe it or not, apparently they tell them at the UN, you're not even supposed to take a leaflet. So I don't know if they just want people to be stupid, or, I mean, I guess that helps. But at any rate, so people were very nervous even about stopping, although we did get a number of contacts, really excellent people, very interesting, hyphenated Americans, a Bosnian fellow who was organizing against or some kind of remembrance of the genocide in Srebrenica, and others. And we did get a number of contacts who want to stay in touch. In fact, some of them might be on the call today. I'm hoping they are. And then the next day, people went, instead of being right across from the UN, over by 42nd Street, which is very busy. And the report I got from there is when we asked what happened at the end of the day, everyone said, we don't know what happened, because every single one of us was in a conversation at every single minute. So it was such interest, you couldn't prevent people from coming over. The signs, one very plain black and white, no war with Iran. One, Free Palestine, build the Oasis plan. One is the BRICS and peace through economic development. Only a couple negative responses who seemed to be from people coming directly from the Israeli mission, who were sort of in violent rage fits. But otherwise, it's true. There is a shift here. I think what's urgently needed is the big, beautiful ideas, so people know which direction they're moving in. That's what I can say.
Great. Yeah, I just want to emphasize actually one thing that you put out, Diane, which was really, really useful. I'm not going to show it right now because it's 6 minutes long and we should continue to the discussion, but I just want to make sure people see it. You had made this awesome, this very great TikTok. People go to dianesayer.tlo on TikTok. They can find it just on the situation that's happening right now. And I just want to recommend people take a look at that. So thank you, Diane, for joining us. I know you're super busy and you're out in the street and you're organizing, you're doing tons of videos right now. Other people should definitely be joining in doing this process as well. So thank you so much. Great. Okay. So we are definitely at our time for discussion. Helga, I wanted to see if you had a response before we continued to anything that's said thus far. Otherwise, we can just get to questions and discussion with the panel.
Well, I definitely want to thank Professor Sequeira, because, I have been saying the whole time that the people from the global south have to speak out loud, because I'm absolutely certain that if the normal population in Germany, France, Italy, United States would know, that there is this tectonic change going on where the countries of the global south are fighting to overcome neocolonialism forever, and that they are in a position to do that because of the rise of China and the development of the alternative system, represented by the Belt and Road Initiative, which happens to be in complete cohesion with what my late husband, Helga LaRouche, and our movement have been fighting for. And not only fighting for, we were among the architects of the Eurasian land bridge. That was our proposal for a peace order of the 21st century after the end of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union had disintegrated. So I also think this call for a broad international peace movement, and not just against nuclear war and war in general, but for development. I think that if we could convince many, many people to get out in the streets and fight for a peace plan, like for the Oasis plan, but also for the development of Africa, of Latin America, I think that would be the real counter to the effort by the oligarchs to keep control. And, I know it's much more difficult for people to conceptualize a beautiful vision of how the world could look like. And, for some reason, it seems to be much easier to go in the streets and say, I'm against this, I'm against that. But I think the real step to victory would be if people say, no, the countries of the global south have the right to have the same potential unfolding like we had enjoyed it for so long in the global north. And if people would recognize that that is the key issue of our time, I think then we would break the control of those who are trying to manipulate and set people against each other all the time. So I'm really calling for support of what you said in this respect.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I definitely see people who are rushing in to raise their hands. We're going to make the transition and then have this discussion. People who are on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, whatever you're on right now, if you want to partake in the discussion with the panelists, you must be registered and be on Zoom. You can do that by going to theshillerinstitute.com, and right on the top of the webpage, there is a RSVP button. You go there, register, and you will get the Zoom link to participate. And we do have translation on here as well. So with that, Dave, just let me know when we've cut the stream.